My name is Alexandra, but everyone calls me Alex. At 33 years old, I've carved out a successful life for myself as an architect in Denver. But that life was built on the ruins of another one, a life that ended 19 years ago when my parents deserted me at a remote gas station 80 miles from home because I'd spoiled their vacation. Their parting words were to toughen up and find my own way back. Now, on my kitchen counter, sits a wedding invitation from my brother. Tucked inside is a note from them. My hands shake as I look at it, caught between the cold fury I've nurtured for nearly 2 decades and a flicker of curiosity about what they could possibly want after all this time. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from, and if you want to hear the story of how I finally faced the people who left me to fend for myself, make sure you're subscribed. I was raised in a quiet middle-class suburb of Salt Lake City, Utah. Our house was a standard 2-story colonial with gray siding, on a street where every home looked almost identical, right down to the perfectly manicured lawns. To any passerby, we were the picture of a normal American family. But inside, our home was governed by a code of toughness so extreme it often tipped over into cruelty. My father, David, had been a Marine for a decade before I was born, and he brought that rigid discipline home with him, never fully shedding the uniform. Every morning, beds had to be made with precise military corners. Every possession had a designated spot. Every emotion was a liability to be suppressed. My mother, Helen, was a product of an even more austere upbringing than the one she helped create. Her parents were old-school ranchers who believed that comfort bred weakness. She loved to tell us stories about hiking miles to school in blizzards and holding down a job from age 11 to help the family. Back then, kids understood what real responsibility was, she'd say whenever I dared to complain about homework or chores. We didn't have time for whining. My brother, Marcus, was 3 years my senior and seemed genetically engineered to meet our parents' demanding standards. He was naturally stoic, a gifted athlete, and fiercely independent. He could fix his own bike chain by the age of 6, never shed a tear after a sports injury, and just seemed to absorb the unspoken rules of our household. Our parents would glow with pride whenever his teachers remarked on his maturity. I was the opposite. I was a sensitive kid from day one, drawn to art, books, and big feelings. When a robin flew into our picture window, I insisted on a formal burial in the garden. When a beloved character in a novel died, I was inconsolable for days. My emotional nature was viewed not as a trait, but as a flaw, something that needed to be corrected. The corrections began early. When I was 7, I had a small meltdown in a supermarket after a long, exhausting shopping trip. I was hungry and tired. Instead of offering a snack or a kind word, my father crouched down to my eye level, his gaze intense. "You are making a scene," he said, his voice low and sharp. "We are leaving. You can either walk with us to the car now, or you can figure out your own way home." My mother stood behind him, nodding. "It's time you grew up, Alexandra." I remember the panic that seized me, and I scrambled after them through the aisles. They didn't actually abandon me that day, but the threat was planted. My feelings were a burden, and expressing them might mean being left behind. When I was 8, I went through a phase of being terrified of the dark. I pleaded for a nightlight, but my parents saw it as another weakness to be stamped out. "Fear is a choice," my father declared, "and you're choosing to be a coward instead of choosing to be brave." For weeks, I'd lie awake paralyzed by imagined terrors until exhaustion finally took me. I eventually figured out I could hide under my comforter with a small reading light. When they found it, they confiscated it. "You'll never learn to stand on your own 2 feet if we keep saving you," my mother said, as if she were imparting some great wisdom. All the while, Marcus was rewarded with a new 10-speed bike for his straight A's, was allowed to have friends over constantly, and was never subjected to the same grueling, toughening-up regimen I was. The double standard was glaringly obvious, but it was a forbidden topic in our house. The only person who ever seemed to see me, truly see me, was my Aunt Sarah, my mother's younger sister. On her infrequent visits, she would bring me sketch pads and novels, things that fed my spirit instead of trying to break it. She'd pass me little notes saying it was okay to be who I was, to feel what I felt, but her visits were too few and far between to counteract the constant messaging at home that there was something fundamentally broken inside me. By the time I was 14, I had mastered the art of silent rebellion. I learned to cry without making a sound in the shower. I kept a detailed journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in my bedroom. I built a rich inner world where my feelings were not only valid, but important. A stark contrast to the outside world that told me they were a nuisance. But this quiet defiance only made my parents more determined to force me into their mold. The pressure in our house was building, heading toward an explosion none of us saw coming. The summer I turned 14, my father announced a rare family vacation, a trip to Zion National Park. Despite everything, I felt a genuine spark of excitement. The thought of seeing the massive sandstone cliffs and spending time in nature appealed to my artistic soul. I packed my sketchbook and charcoal pencils, already dreaming of the landscapes I would draw. The trouble started the moment we crammed into our Ford Explorer on a blistering hot Saturday in August. The vinyl seats were already scorching and sticky. Marcus immediately claimed the entire back row, stretching out with his Discman and magazines. I was squished in the middle, trying to take up as little space as possible. "Alexandra, stop fidgeting," my mother snapped as I struggled to buckle my seatbelt. "We have a 5-hour drive. Settle down." "Sorry," I mumbled, the familiar feeling of being in the wrong already settling over me. My father angled the rearview mirror to pin me with his gaze. "This trip is a major expense. I expect both of you to be grateful and maintain a positive attitude. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir," Marcus and I chorused. The drive was mostly silent, broken only by my parents' occasional comments about road signs or exit numbers. I gazed out the window, watching the urban sprawl of Salt Lake City give way to the stark, beautiful desert of southern Utah. When I asked if we could stop at a roadside fruit stand, my father dismissed it without turning his head. "We're not making unscheduled stops. We're on a timetable." We reached the campground in the mid-afternoon and set up camp with my father, barking orders like a drill sergeant. When I fumbled with a tent stake, unable to drive it into the rocky ground, my mother snatched the mallet from my hand. "Sometimes I worry how you'll ever function in the real world," she said, pounding the stake in with 2 forceful blows. That night, around the campfire, I tried to start a conversation. "Did you know that some of these rock formations are over 250 million years old? I read about it in the park brochure." "Everybody knows that, brainiac," Marcus sneered. My father gave him an approving nod. "Your brother did his research. He was telling us all about it on the drive while you were staring out the window." I hadn't heard a word of any such conversation, but I knew better than to argue. "I just poked at the fire with a stick until my mother told me to stop it before I put the fire out." The real disaster began the next morning when my father announced we were doing an 8-mile hike on a notoriously strenuous trail. I'd woken up feeling queasy, maybe from the slightly undercooked burgers we'd had for dinner, but complaining was not an option. An hour into the hike, the combination of the high altitude, the relentless sun, and my churning stomach became unbearable. "I need to sit down for a minute," I said, stopping on the path. My father spun around, his face a mask of irritation. "We've barely been walking for an hour." "I don't feel good," I admitted, my voice small. "My stomach really hurts." My mother let out a loud, theatrical sigh. "It's always something with you, Alexandra. Marcus hiked 12 miles with a sprained wrist at his scout jamboree last year." From behind our parents, Marcus shot me a smug look. "I'm really not feeling well," I insisted, a clammy sweat breaking out on my skin. "Fine," my father snapped. "You can sit here and wallow in self-pity. We're continuing the hike. We'll pick you up on our way back." My mother didn't even glance at me as they walked away. "Drink some water," she called over her shoulder. "It's probably just dehydration from all your moping." I sat on a sun-baked rock for what felt like an eternity, probably closer to 3 hours. sipping my water and feeling sick. Sick from my stomach, and sick from the bitter knowledge that I had failed yet another one of their impossible tests. When they finally returned, not one of them asked how I felt. The rest of the day was thick with a tense, angry silence. That evening, my father made the announcement. We're cutting the trip short. Since someone isn't well enough to participate in the activities we planned, there's no point in staying. The accusation was a physical weight in the air. My mother nodded grimly. Marcus kicked a loose rock, glaring at me. "Why does she have to ruin everything?" he muttered, just loud enough for me to hear. I went to my sleeping bag that night and curled into a tight ball, trying to make myself disappear within the confines of our tent. The next morning, we broke down the camp in silence. The only sounds were the rustle of the tent fabric and the clanking of camping gear. As we drove away from Zion, I watched the majestic red cliffs shrink in the rear-view mirror, knowing I had somehow managed to ruin this too. About 2 hours into the drive home, my father pulled into a dusty, isolated gas station in a tiny town I'd never seen before. It was just 2 pumps and a small, grimy convenience store set against a backdrop of endless desert scrub. "I have to use the restroom," I said as the car stopped. "Be quick," my father ordered. When I came back out, my parents and Marcus were standing by the car. My father had just finished filling the tank, and my mother was looking at a map. "Alexandra," my father said, his voice disturbingly calm, "you are 14 years old now. You're old enough to understand that actions have consequences." I froze, a cold dread creeping up my spine. "Yesterday, you made a choice to spoil our family vacation," he continued. "So today, you can make another choice. You can choose to find your own way home." "What?" I whispered, the word barely audible. My mother folded the map and met my gaze with eyes like chips of ice. "It's time you learned that your choices affect other people. Maybe this experience will finally teach you to toughen up." "You can't be serious," I stammered, my eyes darting between them, waiting for the punchline of some horrifying joke. Marcus was already in the back of the Explorer, his face turned deliberately away from me. "We're about an hour from home," my father said, a bald-faced lie. "We'd been driving for 2 hours and the whole trip was 5. You have your allowance money. There's a phone inside. Figure it out." And with that, he climbed into the driver's seat. My mother walked to the passenger side, pausing just long enough to say, "This is for your own good, Alexandra. Some lessons have to be hard if they're going to stick." I was paralyzed with disbelief, watching as they started the engine. "You can't just leave me here," I cried, stumbling toward the car. My father lowered his window a few inches. "Watch us," he said. And then they were gone, peeling out of the station and leaving me in a swirling cloud of dust and exhaust. I watched until the Explorer was just a speck on the horizon, absolutely certain they would turn back. They never did. For the first hour, I sat on the cracked curb in front of the gas station, telling myself this was just an escalation of their usual lessons. They wanted to scare me, to teach me a lesson about self-reliance. They would be back. After the second hour, a terrifying reality began to sink in. They might not be coming back. I forced myself to go inside the store and approach the clerk, a teenager with a bad case of acne and a name tag that read, Kevin. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling. "My parents, they left me here. Can I use your phone?" Kevin looked up from his comic book, his expression a mixture of boredom and suspicion. "Phones for customers." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my weekly allowance, a $10 bill and a couple of quarters. "Can I buy something and then use it?" He just shrugged. "Knock yourself out." I bought a bottle of soda for $2, leaving me with just over $8. Kevin gestured to an old, greasy payphone on the wall. I called our home number first, listening to it ring and ring until the answering machine picked up. "It's Alex," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm still at the gas station. Please come back and get me." I hung up and immediately called again, thinking they might be screening my calls. Nothing. Next, I tried my Aunt Sarah, but her voicemail picked up. "Aunt Sarah, it's Alex. Mom and Dad, they left me at a gas station on the way home from Zion. I don't know where I am." I realized I didn't know the payphone's number. I had to hang up, find the number printed on a tiny metal plate, and call her back to leave it. I tried a few other family numbers, but it was a Sunday afternoon. No one was home. I went back to Kevin. "Do you know what town this is?" "Cedar Ridge," he said, not looking up. "About 80 miles south of Salt Lake." 80 miles. I had been right. My father had lied. "Is there a bus station?" I asked, my hope dwindling. I knew $8 wouldn't get me very far. Kevin actually snorted. "Bus stops here on Wednesdays. It's Sunday." I went back to the curb and watched the sun dip toward the horizon. A few cars came and went, but no one gave me a second glance. I thought about asking a stranger for help, but my parents' endless warnings about stranger danger echoed in my head. The crushing irony was that the very people who had warned me the world was a dangerous place were the ones who had just thrown me into it. As dusk settled, the desert air grew cold. I was only wearing shorts and a t-shirt. I had no jacket, no blanket, nothing. The gas station closed at 9 p.m. As he was locking up, Kevin gave me a flicker of concern. "You got a ride coming, kid?" "Yes, they're on their way," I lied, unable to admit how utterly alone I was. He seemed relieved. "All right, good luck." And then he drove off in his beat-up Toyota, and I was completely alone. The store lights went out, leaving only the buzzing fluorescent lights over the pumps. Panic, real and suffocating, started to close in. I was going to be out here all night. I circled the building, searching for shelter. Behind the store was a large dumpster, and behind that a small alcove created by the building's back wall and a stack of old wooden pallets. It smelled of garbage and stale beer, but it was hidden from the road and offered a slight break from the wind. I squeezed myself into the small space, pulled my knees to my chest, and tried to become invisible. The ground was cold and littered with trash. I heard something scurrying nearby and had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. My stomach ached with hunger, but I knew I had to conserve my money. I took tiny sips from my soda, knowing that when it was gone, that was it until morning. As the sky turned black, the desert came alive with sounds. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of unseen creatures in the brush, the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. Every noise sent a fresh jolt of fear through me. This was a primal terror, the fear of being small and vulnerable in a vast, indifferent world. I thought about my family driving home. Were they feeling guilty? Or were they satisfied, convinced they were teaching me a valuable lesson? I pictured Marcus in his room, maybe feeling a pang of guilt, but too afraid of our parents to object. I pictured my mother setting 3 places for dinner, my father watching TV in his recliner, their lives continuing as if nothing had happened. Sometime after midnight, the temperature plunged. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. Insects buzzed around my head. I felt something crawl over my ankle and had to cram my fist into my mouth to stifle a scream. The emotions came in waves. First, sheer disbelief. Then, a tidal wave of fear, a slideshow of all the horrible things that could happen. What if no one came? What if a wild animal found me? What if I just froze to death out here? Around 2 a.m., the fear gave way to a hot, burning anger, a rage so intense it was almost warming. How could they? What kind of parents abandon their own child for getting sick? The pure injustice of it made me want to scream at the sky, but I stayed silent, terrified of what I might attract. Finally, as the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, the anger cooled into a hard, clear resolve. If I got through this night, I would never, ever forgive them. Our relationship was shattered. I started to make a plan, what I would do when the sun came up, who I could possibly trust now that I knew I couldn't trust them. In that coldest, darkest hour, a strange sort of calm washed over me. I was still cold, hungry, and terrified, but something inside me had hardened into steel. I knew with absolute certainty that my life was now split in two, before the gas station and after. The girl I had been yesterday was gone forever, replaced by someone who understood, with brutal clarity, just how disposable she was to the people who were supposed to love her most. As the sun finally rose, I crawled out from behind the dumpster, every muscle screaming in protest, and went to wait for the station to open. The morning light was unkind, revealing the gas station as even more run down than it had seemed. The paint was peeling, the sign was missing letters, the concrete was a patchwork of ancient oil stains. I sat on the curb, filthy and exhausted, watching the sun climb higher. At 7:30, an old pickup truck rumbled into the lot. A stout man in overalls got out, unlocked the store, and flipped the sign to open. He did a double take when he saw me. "You been out here all night, honey?" he asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I just nodded, too tired to speak. "Good Lord," he muttered. "Come on inside, let's get you sorted." The man's name was George, and he was the owner. He led me into a small back room. "Betty," he called, "get in here." A kind-faced woman appeared. She took one look at me and gasped. "Oh, you poor thing, what happened?" I told them the story, half expecting the same suspicious disbelief I'd gotten from Kevin. Instead, Betty's face flushed with anger. "What kind of animals would do that to their own daughter?" she fumed. "George, call the sheriff." "No, please," I said quickly. "Can I just call my aunt? She'll come." George nodded and let me use the phone on the counter. This time, Aunt Sarah answered on the second ring. "Hello?" "Aunt Sarah," I choked out. "It's Alex. Alex! Honey, what is it? Why are you calling so early?" "Mom and Dad, they left me at a gas station yesterday. They just drove off." There was a dead silence on the line. Then her voice was sharp, focused. "Where are you, Alex? Exactly where are you?" "A gas station in a town called Cedar Ridge. They said I ruined the vacation because I got sick, and they left me here to teach me a lesson." The words came out in a flood of sobs I couldn't hold back anymore. "They did what?" Aunt Sarah's voice was a roar. "Put the owner on the phone, honey." I handed the phone to George, who confirmed my location and assured her I was safe. When he hung up, he looked at me kindly. "Your aunt's on her way. Says she'll be here in under 90 minutes. In the meantime, Betty's going to get you something to eat." Betty took me to the restroom, gave me a wet cloth to clean my face, and a comb for my matted hair. When I came out, a hot breakfast sandwich and a carton of juice were waiting for me. She refused to let me pay. "You keep your money, sweetie. You never know." True to her word, Aunt Sarah's car screeched into the parking lot a little over an hour later. She burst out of the car and wrapped me in a hug so fierce it almost hurt. "Oh, Alex, are you okay? Did anyone hurt you? I can't believe this." She held me at arm's length, her eyes frantic as she checked me for injuries. "I'm okay," I said, though we both knew it was a lie. Aunt Sarah turned to George and Betty. "Thank you. Thank you for taking care of her. I don't know how I can ever repay you." "No need," George said gruffly. "Just make sure the people who did this get what's coming to them." The drive back to Salt Lake was quiet at first. I stared out at the passing desert, the same landscape that had seemed so beautiful yesterday, now looking hostile and alien. "I called your house," Aunt Sarah finally said, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "No answer. We'll try again from my place." Her apartment was a small 2-bedroom on the west side of the city. It was a bit cluttered, filled with books and plants, the polar opposite of my parents' sterile, minimalist house. "You can stay in the guest room for as long as you need," she said, leading me to a room that also served as her home office. "Let's try your parents again." This time, my mother answered on the fourth ring. Aunt Sarah put it on speaker. "Hello? Helen, it's Sarah. I have Alex here with me." There was a pause. "Oh, she called you." The casual, unconcerned tone made my stomach twist into a knot. "Yes, Helen," she called me. After she spent the night sleeping behind a dumpster because her own parents abandoned her at a gas station. What in the hell were you thinking? "Sarah, you're not understanding. Alexandra has been very defiant lately. She has to learn that there are consequences for her actions." "Consequences?" She's 14, Helen. You left your daughter 80 miles from home with no food, no shelter, and no way to get back. Do you have any idea what could have happened to her?" "We were teaching her self-reliance," my mother replied, her voice stiff with indignation. "David and I discussed it. We knew she'd figure something out." "Figure what out, Helen? How to not get abducted? How to not freeze to death? How to survive being abandoned by the two people on Earth who are supposed to protect her? You're being hysterical. Alexandra has always been overly sensitive. That's the whole problem." I sat there, listening to my mother justify what she'd done, and something inside me turned to ice. This wasn't a mistake made in a moment of anger. This was premeditated. They had discussed it. They had planned it. "I want to talk to her," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Aunt Sarah handed me the phone. "Mom," I said, "are you and Dad coming to get me?" "Alexandra," my mother replied, her tone shifting to that fake, gentle voice that always set my teeth on edge. "This is a lesson. When you're ready to apologize for ruining the trip and show that you understand the importance of considering others, then we can talk about you coming home." In that instant, I knew I could never go back there. "I slept behind a dumpster last night," I said quietly. "I was cold and I was scared. Is that what you wanted?" "Sometimes the hardest lessons are the most important," she said. "When you're ready to come home and live by our rules, you have our number." I handed the phone back to Aunt Sarah, who then had the most volcanic argument I had ever heard. I heard words like neglect, abuse, and child protective services. By the time she slammed the phone down, it was settled. I was staying with her, and she was filing for emergency custody. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Aunt Sarah took me to a doctor who documented everything: the insect bites, the scratches, the effects of exposure. We met with a social worker to whom I gave a detailed statement about the incident and the years leading up to it. Aunt Sarah used her savings to hire a lawyer. A few days later, we went to my parents' house with a police escort to get my things. My parents were icily polite, their faces like stone as I packed my life into black trash bags. Marcus hovered in the hallway, looking miserable. When our parents were distracted by the officer, he slipped into my room. "Alex," he whispered, "I didn't know they were actually going to leave you. I thought they were just trying to scare you." I just looked at him, my brother, the golden child, who had sat in the car and watched them drive away. "But you didn't do anything, Marcus. You just let it happen." He looked down at his shoes. "I know, I'm sorry." It was the only apology I would ever receive from any of them. As we were leaving, my father blocked the doorway. "This little rebellion of yours won't solve anything, Alexandra. When you're ready to be a part of this family again, you know the rules." "I expect parents who don't abandon their children," I shot back, the boldness surprising even me. I guess we're all disappointed. I walked out of that house and never looked back. Living with Aunt Sarah was like entering a different dimension. In her small, warm apartment, feelings weren't a flaw. When I woke up screaming from nightmares, she didn't tell me to toughen up. She made me tea and just sat with me while I tried to put words to the terror. The custody battle was swift. My parents initially fought it, painting me as a manipulative problem child, but the evidence was damning. George and Betty from the gas station gave statements. The doctor's report was clinical and chilling. My own testimony sealed it. When my parents saw they were losing, they changed tactics, suddenly claiming they'd made a terrible mistake and wanted me back. But their actions spoke louder. During a court-ordered supervised visit, my father lectured me on family loyalty. My mother cried about how I was tearing the family apart. Neither one said they were sorry. The judge granted Aunt Sarah permanent custody. My parents stopped fighting it. It was easier for them to erase me than to admit they were wrong. I changed schools. I live with my aunt now became my standard, vague reply to questions. Aunt Sarah enrolled me in therapy with a woman named Dr. Evans, who specialized in childhood trauma. "What your parents did was about them, Alex, not you," she told me over and over. "There is nothing a child can do to deserve abandonment. I understood it intellectually, but my heart took longer to catch up. A part of me still felt that if I had just been stronger, quieter, more like Marcus, they would have loved me. Marcus and I maintained a fragile, awkward connection. He would call occasionally, always when our parents were out. He visited me once, sitting uncomfortably on the edge of Aunt Sarah's couch. "They never talk about you," he admitted. "It's like you don't exist anymore. Are they still the same?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, "but stricter. I think they're afraid I'll turn out like you." Aunt Sarah became my true parent. She came to every school event, celebrated every small victory, and held me through every panic attack. She worked extra shifts at the hospital to make ends meet, never once making me feel like a burden. I poured myself into my schoolwork, especially art and design. When I won a statewide art competition my junior year, Aunt Sarah framed the certificate. My parents never acknowledged it. Their silence was just another form of abandonment, but by then, I'd stopped expecting anything else. I knew I had to get away from Salt Lake City for college. The day I got my acceptance letter to a prestigious architecture program in Denver, Aunt Sarah and I danced around her tiny kitchen. Moving to another state was terrifying, but it was also the final step in proving to myself that I could not only survive on my own, but thrive. The irony was thick. In their cruel attempt to force my independence, they had accidentally succeeded, just not on their terms. College was where I found my people. Other creative, sensitive souls who saw my emotional depth as a strength. I graduated with honors and was hired by a firm in Denver. My brother Marcus had also moved, taking a finance job in Boulder, an hour away. Our relationship evolved into a cautious friendship, meeting for coffee a few times a year, always steering clear of the topic of our parents. By my late 20s, I had my own clients, had won a few design awards, and bought a condo with a view of the mountains. By all external measures, I was a success, but I still slept with a nightlight. I still had a deep-seated fear of being a burden. I still carried the ghost of that night behind the dumpster. But I also had a chosen family, my friends, my therapist, and Aunt Sarah, who called every single Sunday. I had a life built on my own terms, and I maintained one firm rule: zero contact with my parents. Their occasional holiday cards and birthday emails went straight into the trash. The wall between us was of my own construction, and I had no plans to build a gate until 19 years after they left me, when the wedding invitation showed up. It arrived on a Tuesday, a thick cream-colored envelope. Inside was the invitation for the wedding of Marcus Pierce to Olivia Reed, but tucked inside that was a smaller, plain white envelope with my name on it. My hands trembled. I let it sit on my counter for 3 days, a little white rectangle of pure dread. Finally, I tore it open. Alexandra. It began. Marcus's wedding has us thinking about family and the time we've lost. We know we made mistakes. We would like the chance to talk to you before the wedding, if you'd be open to it. We understand if you are not. Regardless, we hope you'll be there for your brother. He misses you. Helen and David Pierce. It wasn't an apology. It was a corporate memo about unspecified mistakes. The sterile, detached words hit me like a physical shock. My breath caught in my chest, the room started to tilt, and I fumbled for my phone to call my friend, Chloe. She found me on my kitchen floor, trying to breathe. When I calmed down, I handed her the note. "Those absolute monsters," she said. "This isn't even an apology." "I know," I whispered. "But Marcus wants me at his wedding." "What do you want to do, Alex?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to burn it, but another part of me wants closure." That night, I called my therapist, Dr. Evans. She fit me in the next morning. "This is a major trigger," she said after reading the note. "But remember, you're not 14 anymore. You're 33. You hold all the cards now. You decide if you engage, and you set the terms. I called Aunt Sarah, now retired in Arizona. Whatever you choose, I support you 100%, she said. But if you go, I'm going with you. You are not facing them alone. Her words were the deciding factor. 2 weeks after getting the invitation, I called Marcus. "I got your invite," I said. "And the note." "I'll be there," I continued. "But I'm coming for you and Olivia, not for them." "Thank you, Alex," he said, the relief in his voice palpable. "They want to meet with you before the wedding." "I'll think about it," I said, making no promises. After another session with Dr. Evans, I made my decision. I would meet them, but on my terms, in a public restaurant, with Aunt Sarah there, and I would leave the second I wanted to. I booked our flights and a hotel. I was not staying with family. I wrote down everything I wanted to say, practicing it until the words didn't make my voice shake. As the day got closer, the nightmares returned. The week before the wedding, Marcus texted, "They're really looking forward to seeing you. Thanks for giving them this chance." I stared at the message. "I'm giving them a chance to talk," I texted back. "That's all." The night before we flew to Utah, I looked out at the Denver skyline. 19 years of building this life. Was I really about to risk it all for the people who threw me away? Then I thought of that scared, lonely girl behind the dumpster. She deserved a voice. I was going to speak for her. The flight was turbulent, mirroring my own inner state. Marcus met us at our hotel. He looked older, his hair thinning, but his nervous smile was the same. "You look great, Alex," he said, giving me an awkward hug. After some small talk, he got to the point. "Mom and Dad are really nervous about tomorrow." "That makes two of us," I replied. "What do they want, Marcus?" Their note was a little vague. He sighed. "I think they want to apologize. In their own way." "Their own way," I repeated. "Like abandoning a child is just a parenting style?" "Alex," he started, but Aunt Sarah cut him off. "Marcus, you know what they did was monstrous. It wasn't a lesson. It was abuse. He had the decency to look ashamed. I know. And I think they know too. They're just terrible at admitting they're wrong." The next morning, Aunt Sarah and I arrived at the restaurant early. I needed to see them walk in. "Remember," she said, squeezing my hand, "you're in control. We can leave at any time." At exactly 11 a.m., they walked in. The 19 years had changed them. They weren't the towering, intimidating figures of my memory. They were just two people in their late 60s. My father's military bearing had softened. My mother looked smaller, frailer. They saw us, and my mother's hand flew to her throat, a gesture I remembered well. My father's jaw tightened. They approached our table. "Alexandra," my mother said, her voice unsteady. "You look..." "Well?" "Helen?" "David," Aunt Sarah said, her voice flat. An excruciating silence fell. "Thank you for meeting us," my father finally said. My carefully rehearsed speeches vanished. "Why now?" I asked. "After 19 years, why now?" "Marcus's wedding," my mother started. "It made us realize how much time has passed. That family is important." "Family," I repeated, the word tasting like poison. "You left me at a gas station. You left me to sleep behind a dumpster. You never called to see if I was alive. And now you want to talk about family?" "We made a mistake," my father said, the words seeming to cause him physical pain. "We took the lesson too far." "A lesson?" My voice rose. "Is that what you're calling it?" "We were trying to teach you to be self-reliant," my mother pleaded. You never meant for me to be terrified? To be hungry and cold? To believe my own parents didn't care if I lived or died? What did you mean to happen?" "We thought you'd call a friend," my father said, "or find a police officer, show some initiative." The sheer absurdity of it was breathtaking. Initiative. I was a child, your child. Your job was to protect me, not test me. "We know that now," my mother said softly. "We've had 19 years to think about it." 19 years where you never once tried to truly apologize, I shot back. "We reached out," my father insisted, "and I cut you off for my own sanity." I was almost shouting now. "You were toxic. You hurt me on purpose, and then you acted like you did me a favor. Why would I ever let you back in?" "Alex, please," Marcus said, putting a hand on my arm. "They're trying." I shook him off. No, Marcus. Trying would have been therapy. Trying would have been a real apology, not some vague note you slipped into your wedding invitation to ambush me. My father's face hardened into that old familiar mask of disapproval. You were always too emotional, Alexandra. That's the weakness we were trying to fix. And there it was. That's the real reason, I said, a cold calm settling over me. You didn't abandon me to teach me a lesson. You did it because you couldn't stand that I had feelings, that I wasn't the unfeeling robot you wanted. That's not fair, my mother whispered. Fair? Aunt Sarah finally spoke, her voice like ice. You want to talk about fair, Helen? Was it fair to leave your 14-year-old daughter 80 miles from home? Was it fair to drive away and not even look back? My mother's face crumpled. For the first time, I saw something that looked like real remorse. No, she whispered. It wasn't fair. We were wrong. No, you shouldn't have, I agreed. But you did. And now, 19 years later, I've built a good life without you. I'm strong and independent. Everything you claimed you wanted for me. I did it despite you, not because of you. And we're proud of you, my mother said, reaching for my hand. I let her touch it for a second before pulling away. You don't get to be proud of me, I said quietly. You didn't earn that right. The people who get to be proud of me are Aunt Sarah, my friends, my chosen family, the people who helped me heal from what you did. What can we do to make it right? My mother asked. I thought about it. I don't know if you can, but you can start by admitting exactly what you did, with no excuses. You can go to therapy to understand why you thought abandoning your child was okay, and you can respect whatever boundaries I decide to set from now on. My father nodded stiffly. We can do that. I'll believe it when I see it, I said. For now, I'll be at the wedding tomorrow. I'll be polite. But don't mistake that for forgiveness. That will take a lot more than one conversation. The wedding was beautiful. Olivia was as warm and kind as Marcus had described. I gave a short toast focused entirely on them. My parents kept their distance. As Aunt Sarah and I were leaving the reception, my mother approached me alone. Alexandra, she said, thank you for coming. It meant the world to Marcus. I just nodded. I came for him. I know, she said, twisting her hands. I wanted to say, that night. I've replayed it in my head 1,000 times, how scared you must have been. I am so sorry for everything. It was the most direct, unequivocal apology she had ever given, and something in me, some tightly wound knot, loosened just a little. Thank you, I said. Would it be okay if I called you sometime? She asked, her voice hopeful. You can email me, I offered. Let's start there. A flicker of a genuine smile touched her lips. I'd like that. On the flight back to Denver, Aunt Sarah asked if I was okay. I think so, I said, and was surprised to find I meant it. I stood up for that 14-year-old girl. Whatever comes next, I did that for her. I am so proud of you, she said, squeezing my hand. You're the strongest person I know. Life in Denver went back to normal, but something inside me had shifted. The past was still there, but it didn't feel as heavy. I wasn't just the girl who was abandoned anymore. I was the woman who survived. 2 weeks later, an email from my mother appeared in my inbox. It was stilted and full of small talk about the weather, but it was a start. I waited a few days before sending a brief, equally cautious reply. I have no idea if this will lead to a real reconciliation, but I know that for the first time, I'm approaching it from a place of strength, not need. The scars will always be there, but we get to choose if we let them define us, or if we wear them as proof of our own resilience. That night taught me that the people who are supposed to love you can hurt you the most, but the years since have taught me that you can build your own family, one that will never, ever leave you behind. I'm curious to hear from you. Have you ever had to face someone from your past who wronged you? What was the outcome? Let me know your story down in the comments. If this account resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing, and maybe share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your value is not determined by the people who failed to see it. You are so much stronger than what happened to you.